"Sir, this section is for designated family. Step back, or security will escort you." They saw a forgotten soldier in a faded jacket. He clutched his son's handwritten invitation, "Dad, front row." But 6 elite operators, watching silently from the 5th row, knew his truth. When they rose, the room would too. Welcome to Resolute Hearts, where stories of valor and unyielding spirit are brought to light. Let's uncover the events of that memorable day. The sun had barely painted the sky over Northwood University when Linda Monroe steered her sedan into the faculty parking lot. Graduation morning. A hopeful stillness filled the crisp Virginia air. Linda smoothed her dress, a program clutched in her hand, her son's name prominent, Dean's List. Pride swelled in her chest. The auditorium buzzed with families, balloons, and camera flashes. An usher guided her to a seat, 5th row, offering a clear view of the stage and, more interestingly to Linda, the assembling crowd. That's when she saw him. He hadn't used the main entrance. He materialized from a side door near the emergency exit, quiet, deliberate, alone. He wore a faded, well-worn army field jacket, a size too large, it seemed softened by time. His jeans were old, boots scuffed. Hands clasped behind his back, he stood utterly still, a statue of quiet endurance. Linda tilted her head. He didn't look lost, but patient, watchful. Sergeant Major Marcus "Mac" Reynolds, retired Army Ranger, 68 years old, though Linda didn't know that yet. Eventually, Mac moved, slowly and carefully, towards the front rows, approaching the roped-off section marked with silver placards, "Guest of Honor." He neared an empty seat by the aisle. Then, a young woman with a headset and clipboard intercepted him. "Sir," she said, her tone professionally detached, blocking his path. "This section is for designated family only." Mac nodded once, his demeanor calm. "My son is graduating today. Ethan Reynolds. I should be on the list." She didn't check her clipboard, didn't even glance at it. Instead, she gestured vaguely towards the back of the auditorium. "You'll need to stand clear of this area, please. If you don't, security will have to escort you." Linda watched. Mac's posture remained unchanged, no twitch, no flinch. He simply stepped back a single pace. No resistance, no argument. 2 uniformed security guards, alerted by the usher, moved a little closer, hovering. The bustling crowd, caught up in their own excitement, remained largely oblivious. But Linda noticed. And so did a small group of 6 men, seated a few seats to her right in that same 5th row. Their gaze had been fixed on the old soldier since he'd entered the room. The old ranger, Mac, took up a position by the side wall, beneath the stark red glow of an exit sign. His hands remained clasped behind his back, chin slightly lifted, his unwavering gaze fixed on the stage. The ceremony commenced shortly after. A resonant voice welcomed students, parents, and honored guests. Applause rippled through the auditorium, cameras flashed. The dean of Northwood University made a light-hearted remark about tuition fees, and the audience chuckled appreciatively. Linda, however, didn't laugh. Her attention was still drawn to the solitary figure at the back. The young woman with the headset passed him again, this time accompanied by another staff member. "He's still standing there," Linda overheard her whisper. "I don't think he's even an invited guest." "I'll have security keep an eye on him," the other staffer replied, his tone dismissive. A knot tightened in Linda's chest. It wasn't fear, nor was it anger exactly. It was a profound, second-hand shame that clung to her, uninvited. Because that man, whoever he was, didn't exude trouble. He looked like someone who had already weathered far too much of it. His stillness wasn't defiant, it was imbued with a quiet dignity that the bustling room seemed determined to overlook. The 6 men in the 5th row also remained alert, their quiet intensity a stark contrast to the festive atmosphere around them. Their focus on Mac was unwavering. Then came the student speaker, a polished young man named Alistair Finch, the dean's son according to the program. He possessed impeccable posture and an even better suit. He spoke with practiced eloquence, thanking all the appropriate people with all the right pauses. But then, he added something else, a slight smirk playing on his lips. "And a special thanks," he said, with a self-satisfied chuckle, "to the presentable families sitting right here in the front, reminding us all what true Northwood values look like." A wave of polite, perhaps slightly uncomfortable, laughter trickled through the crowd. But Linda didn't laugh. Neither did the man by the exit, Mac. And most tellingly, neither did the 6 men in row 5. They exchanged swift, knowing glances. One of them, tall with a closely cropped haircut visible beneath a civilian ball cap, leaned forward almost imperceptibly. "That barb was for him," he muttered, his voice a low rumble that barely reached Linda, yet carried an undeniable weight. The others gave a single, almost imperceptible, affirmative nod. Their eyes, hard and watchful, flicked from the smug speaker back to Mac, who stood unmoving, his expression unreadable. The air around them seemed to crackle with unspoken tension. Linda looked back towards the stage, then toward Mac by the wall. He hadn't flinched. Still standing, still waiting, still bearing an invisible but unmistakably heavy burden. And in that moment, Linda Monroe knew 2 things with absolute certainty. That man hadn't come here to cause a scene. And someone, or perhaps several someones, had made a colossal mistake. She didn't know his name yet. Didn't know his story, where he hailed from, or what trials had etched those lines onto his face. She didn't know what uniform he once wore with pride or how many nights he'd walked willingly into danger so others wouldn't have to. But she knew this: he didn't belong at the back of the room, relegated to the shadows. Not today. Not ever. And if nobody else was going to acknowledge his quiet dignity, then perhaps, just perhaps, it was up to her. The program continued, a succession of names called, followed by bursts of applause and the relentless flash of cameras. Yet, Linda couldn't tear her gaze from the old soldier at the back, the one everyone else seemed determined to ignore. The injustice of it all felt like a personal affront. The ushers, now more determined, moved again. This time, one of them, a stern-faced woman, clutched a security clipboard. Linda leaned forward, her brow furrowed. Mac didn't resist as the usher approached him, flanked by one of the guards. He simply turned slightly, listening as the guard spoke, his voice too low for Linda to discern the words, but she saw Mac's response. He shook his head gently, then spoke, his voice firm but not loud. "I'm not causing any trouble," he stated. "My son, Ethan, asked me to be here. I'm not moving until I see him walk that stage." The guard straightened, puffing his chest slightly to assert his authority. "Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to come with me. Now." Linda glanced around. No one else was paying attention. The families in the front rows were engrossed in capturing their graduates' moments, oblivious to the quiet drama unfolding mere feet away. Except for the men in row 5. And Linda. She turned to the woman seated next to her, an administrator by her name badge. "Do you know who that man is?" Linda asked quietly. The woman barely looked up from her program. "Probably someone who wandered into the wrong section," she replied, indifferent. "These ceremonies always attract a few extras." Extras. The word struck Linda with unexpected force. As if this man, this monument to stoic dignity in scuffed boots, was mere clutter. She looked back, and for the first time, truly saw him, the deep lines etched into his face, the rigid set of his jaw, the almost imperceptible tilt of his left shoulder, as if an old injury still demanded its due. And the jacket, dark olive drab, brass buttons dulled, sleeves frayed. It wasn't for show. It was his best. The second guard now stepped in, placing a hand on Mac's elbow, urging him toward the exit. And that's when Linda heard it, faint, but unmistakable, the crinkle of paper. Mac reached into the inside pocket of his field jacket and withdrew a small, folded card. Its edges were soft, a testament to countless readings. He held it out, not to the guards, but simply in front of him. Not as a weapon, but as a reason. "My son sent this," he said, his voice low. "Handwritten." Linda caught a fleeting glimpse of words scrawled in blue ink, "Dad, I want you in the front row." But it didn't matter to the staff. "No guest pass, no seat, sir," the usher said firmly. Mac exhaled slowly, a quiet nod of acquiescence. No further resistance, just a weary, obedient step back. Linda felt something rise in her throat, anger, yes, but also a profound, vicarious shame. The sheer injustice of it made her pulse quicken. She opened her mouth, ready to voice her protest, to say something, anything. But she didn't have to. A single chair scraped backward on the polished floor. Then another. And 4 more in rapid succession. From row 5. 6 men stood up, simultaneously. They didn't speak. They didn't shout. They didn't draw attention to themselves with any overt display. Yet, in that unified ripple of movement, Linda felt the entire atmosphere of the auditorium shift, the air suddenly charged. The man nearest the aisle, the tall one with the ball cap, his eyes sharp and assessing, stepped out. He moved with a fluid, purposeful grace that belied his civilian attire. He walked towards the back, towards the old ranger, Mac, towards the man who was being quietly, unjustly, escorted out of his own son's graduation ceremony. The other 5 fanned out slightly behind him, a silent, formidable presence. The festive hum of the auditorium seemed to falter, a few heads turning towards the unexpected movement. The lead man, Hawk, reached Mac and the 2 guards. He didn't address the guards immediately. Instead, he reached into his own jacket, pulled something small and metallic from an inner pocket, and held it out. Linda squinted. It looked like some sort of badge, but not police, not a standard military rank insignia. It gleamed under the bright overhead lights, gold, with silver wings and a distinctive shape. And then she saw it clearly. The unmistakable emblem, the trident. United States Navy SEAL. Another man from the group joined him, then another. All 6 now stood beside the old ranger. Not flanking him as if he were a prisoner, not guarding him, but backing him. Supporting him. Their stance was relaxed yet undeniably resolute. The first one, Hawk, finally looked at the security guard, his voice calm but carrying an undeniable resonance, like a drumbeat in the sudden quiet. "That man doesn't leave this room," he stated, his gaze unwavering. "He led us through hell. He stays right here." Gasps and whispers rippled through the nearby rows. Some people turned fully in their seats, their expressions a mixture of confusion and dawning curiosity. Most still didn't understand the full import of the scene, but Linda did. She rose slowly from her seat, her eyes locked on the old ranger, his name still unknown to her, but not his worth. Because no one gets a Navy SEAL to stand for them by accident. And no one, absolutely no one, gets 6. The guards froze, their expressions shifting from officious assurance to bewildered uncertainty. They looked from the formidable group of men to the gleaming trident badge, then out at the crowd, which was now rapidly becoming aware that something extraordinary was happening. The usher who had so curtly dismissed Mac stepped back, her eyes wide with apprehension. And Mac, the old ranger. He didn't gloat. He didn't lift his head in sudden pride. He simply lowered his gaze to the floor for a brief moment, not out of shame, but as if the vindication itself was a burden he hadn't sought. It was never about a confrontation. It was about a promise, a seat to see his son, a seat that had been denied. The room didn't breathe. For a long, stretched moment, the only sounds were the faint hum of the overhead lights and the distant, nervous shuffling of programs. The 6 men stood shoulder to shoulder, their civilian clothes doing nothing to mask the aura of disciplined power they exuded. The tridents in their hands caught the light, small, shining, and irrefutable. Linda Monroe remained standing, her pulse thrumming in her ears, but her feet felt rooted to the floor. Everyone around her had turned now. Conversations had died mid-sentence. Phones were lowered. Laughter had evaporated as if it had never belonged. And the man at the center of this sudden vortex, Mac, still stood quietly, the folded invitation still clutched in his hand, his jaw set not in anger, but in profound restraint. Hawk, the lead SEAL, took another step forward. His voice, when it came, was low, yet it filled the entire auditorium. "You can't remove him," he reiterated, his tone leaving no room for argument. "You won't." He paused, his gaze sweeping across the now attentive crowd. "This man led us through fire, through dirt, through blood. When the world collapsed behind us, he stood at the front. He turned back to the stunned guards. He does not leave this room." No one clapped. No one cheered. But something palpable shifted in the atmosphere. It was quieter than reverence, as if the room itself was slowly waking from a collective slumber, as if shame had reluctantly pulled back the curtain on its own misguided performance. Then, another voice rose, this time from the left side of the auditorium. It wasn't young, nor was it overtly commanding, but it carried an inherent authority. An older man stood, his chest adorned with military medals that shimmered beneath a neatly pressed gray jacket. A few heads turned, a few more gasped. Linda did too. She recognized the bearing, the quiet command. "I know that man," the older gentleman said, his voice unwavering. "It was retired Army General Wallace. His name is Sergeant Major Marcus Reynolds, 1st Ranger Battalion, United States Army, retired." He took a breath, thick with memory. In 2007, during Operation Desert Fury in Ramadi, Iraq, I watched that man, he gestured towards Mac, run back into a collapsing, burning compound under heavy enemy fire to drag out his entire trapped Ranger platoon and an Air Force combat controller. He didn't ask for backup. He didn't wait for orders. He just went. A silence, heavier than before, fell upon the room. He was the only one who walked out, the general finished, his voice thick with emotion. Because he carried the rest of them on his back. A single cough echoed in the profound stillness. Someone nearby dropped their program, the sound unnaturally loud. But still, no one spoke. Linda looked at the man again. Marcus Reynolds. Mac. Still standing, still silent, still not demanding a single thing. His dignity was a quiet rebuke to the earlier slights. Then, a shuffle from the side of the stage. Movement from behind the rows of seated graduates. A young man in a cap and gown stepped forward, his strides quick, purposeful, his eyes scanning the crowd. His academic cap was tilted slightly to one side, and his hands trembled almost imperceptibly as he reached for the microphone on the podium. Linda knew, even before anyone said a word, this was the son. Ethan Reynolds. He didn't clear his throat. He didn't wait for permission from the flustered dean or any other faculty member. He just leaned into the microphone, his voice clear and strong, cutting through the lingering tension. "That's my dad." Every head in the auditorium instantly swiveled towards the stage. Ethan stared out into the crowd, his young voice tight with a maelstrom of emotions, yet remarkably steady. He didn't want any attention, Ethan continued, his gaze finding his father by the exit. "He never does. Every single morning before school, for as long as I can possibly remember, he told me the same thing." Ethan paused, his breath catching for a moment, then he pushed forward, his words resonating with deep conviction. He'd say, "Stand tall, son. Keep going. And be someone you'd be proud to look in the eye." He looked directly at his father, standing by the exit door, a silent pillar of strength. "I'm proud today, Dad," Ethan said, his voice cracking slightly but firm. "But not because of this degree. Not because of this stage." Then, Lucas stepped out from behind the podium. He didn't hesitate. He walked down the steps, past the rows of stunned graduates, moving with a determined grace towards the back of the auditorium, towards the man they had almost thrown out. He stopped directly in front of his father. No hesitation. Then, in a slow, deliberate, practiced motion, Ethan Reynolds brought his hand to his forehead and rendered a crisp, formal salute to his father. Mac didn't return the salute. Instead, the old ranger stepped forward and pulled his son into a tight, heartfelt embrace. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't rehearsed for an audience. It was real, raw, and profoundly moving. And that authenticity, that unvarnished display of love and respect, hit harder than any eloquent speech or grand gesture could have that day. The 6 Navy SEALs, who had remained standing like sentinels, straightened even further, if that were possible. Then, one by one, yet in perfect, unspoken unison, they tucked their tridents back into their jackets. They raised their hands to their brows, their salutes sharp and precise, a powerful, silent tribute to the man who had once led them into the crucible of combat and, against all odds, walked them back out. Linda blinked rapidly, trying to clear the sudden mist from her vision. She couldn't recall the last time she had witnessed a room full of people so completely forget themselves, so utterly captivated by a moment of pure, unadulterated human connection. People who had been laughing dismissively just minutes before now stood frozen, silent, their expressions a mixture of awe and dawning respect. And in that profound stillness, something almost holy transpired. Not religious in a formal sense, but sacred in its humanity. Mac placed a hand gently on Ethan's shoulder and whispered something that only his son could hear. Ethan smiled faintly, a genuine, heartfelt smile, and nodded. Then, he turned, facing the crowd once more, his father standing proudly beside him. The transformation in the room was complete. Part 5, Dignity Restored and Reflection. The usher who had so curtly dismissed Mac now stared down at her clipboard as if it had personally betrayed her. One of the security guards, the one who had insisted Mac leave, quietly stepped back, fading into a side hallway, his earlier bluster completely deflated. No one tried to stop Mac or Ethan now. No one dared. Linda Monroe watched, a lump in her throat, as Ethan took his father's hand and led him forward, towards the very rows that had once been denied him, towards the front of the auditorium. And for the first time that entire morning, every single person in their path moved out of the way. Not because they were instructed to, not out of fear, but because it was, quite simply, the right thing to do. Mac Reynolds didn't utter a word as he walked beside his son. He didn't have to. The respectful silence of the auditorium, punctuated only by the soft rustle of movement as people made way, said more than words ever could. His walk to the front wasn't hurried. He didn't rush. His worn boots hit the polished floor with the same steady, measured rhythm he must have employed countless times in the field, deliberate, unshaken, resolute. Ethan stayed by his side the entire way. When they reached the roped-off section, the same one he'd been barred from earlier, no one stopped them. The usher who had waved him off now moved aside quickly, her gaze fixed on the floor. This time, there was no resistance, just space. Space that hadn't been grudgingly given, but had now been profoundly earned. Mac didn't gloat, didn't even offer a nod of triumph. He just sat. Second row, center left. Ethan beside him. And behind them, still standing, arms at their sides, ramrod straight, those 6 Navy SEALs remained at attention. They didn't return to their seats in the 5th row. They didn't need to. Their place, it seemed, was behind him, not in front, not beside, but behind, where they had perhaps always figuratively been. The ceremony eventually resumed, but the entire tone had irrevocably changed. When the dean returned to the podium, he didn't speak immediately. He looked towards the group, towards Mac, Ethan, and the SEALs, and paused, visibly unsettled. His voice, when it finally came, was noticeably smaller, less confident than before. "We are honored today," he said, clearing his throat with a nervous cough, "to welcome guests of great distinction. Some, it appears, we failed to recognize soon enough." There was a hesitant pause, then a few scattered claps, then more, swelling into a genuine ovation. But it wasn't for the dean. It wasn't for the faculty. It wasn't even, in that moment, primarily for the graduates. It was for a man who had come with nothing but a folded card in his pocket and the kind of quiet dignity the world too often forgets how to see. Mac didn't smile. He didn't soak in the moment of belated recognition. He simply unfolded the precious invitation one more time, read the words his son had so carefully written, "Dad, I want you in the front row," then tucked it back into his jacket pocket, close to his chest. Because that's what he had come for. Not a spotlight, not an apology, just that seat. Part 6, Epilogue and Engagement Cue. After the ceremony, as the crowd slowly filtered out, Linda remained in her seat. She watched as, one by one, students and even some parents passed by Mac's seat. Some stopped to shake his hand. Some just laid a hand briefly on his shoulder, a silent acknowledgement. One young woman, a graduate with tear-streaked cheeks, paused, saluted him crisply, and whispered, "Thank you, sir. For everything." Mac merely nodded gently. Later, Linda saw one of the seals press a small, heavy coin into Mac's hand, a challenge coin. "The quiet ones lead the loudest wars," was engraved on one side. He hadn't come to demand anything, Linda thought. He came for a seat. But by the time he left, the whole room stood for him. Not because he asked, but because they owed it. In our lives, such silent acts of valor and integrity often go unnoticed. Comment respect if you honor our veterans, and share any stories of unsung heroes you've witnessed. Subscribe, like, and share.